Hello and welcome to Contra Mundum. I am your host, Pastor Andrew Isker, and please welcome my co-host, CJay Andrew. Hello, CJay.
Hey, Andrew. Good to be here, of course.
Yes, always. How was your week, CJay? What's new?
There's a lot of controversy on the internet, and so it's been an exciting week. It was thrilling and it was fun. I have fun with these controversies. You know, it's always great to see like where the chips fall and all that too. You know, it's funny. Like, I mean, we're gonna get into it, but people just talk about like how divisive things are. Like, I feel a sense of camaraderie, you know, with certain people and like having these conversations and stuff. So it was a good week.
I agree. I think it was an excellent week. I think that any time that you can begin to tell the truth about things that people don't want to talk about, right? People are terrified to speak about, is a good week. And that happened a lot this week. So, we'll, instead of just tiptoeing around what happened this week, why don't we get into it? CJay, what happened this week? What was the big controversy?
Well, I think the whole show we're going to be talking about the infamous, the famous, the legendary by now tweet by Stephen Wolf, former guest, by the way, of Contra Mundum,
friend of the show.
That's what he's known for is being a guest on the Contra Mundum
That's
podcast.
right. That's right.
And his tweets. Do you have the tweet? You want to pull it up?
I can pull it up right here. We will add it to the stream. Hopefully, all of our people can see it. So the tweet is the Norman Rockwell painting. With the man standing up, the famous meme. If you've been on the internet for 5 minutes, you've probably seen this meme in the last year. And Stephen Wolf says, "White evangelicals are the lone bulwark against moral insanity in America." That's the tweet. That is a tweet. And right now, as of this recording, it has 1.3 million views. It has over 500 retweets and quote tweets combined. You got ratioed a little bit, as you might expect. And he has 1,500 likes. It set the internet ablaze. Lots of people were very upset. Lots of people were very angry with Stephen with this tweet. And they tried to parse out the language. I mean, it's been gone over a million different times by all sorts of different people. We can go into the people that really lost their minds over it. We can discuss that. But I mean, just looking at it at face value, the first time I saw it, like I think I retweeted it before it had. I think I might have been the first retweet on it. Actually, I might have been.
Fault.
That's right. That's right. This is how much.
Effect.
That's right. The Contra Mundum bump is what he got there. But I saw it. And I thought, well, this is true, and I thought, well, clearly he's talking about voting data. Like I'm aware of the voting data, and so maybe people who got upset aren't, but the most reliably right-wing voting demographic for the last 30 or 40 years at least has been white evangelicals. Right. And so CJay and I are kind of like politics nerds, and like so we know this. We know demographics and voting and polling data and things like this. But yeah, go ahead, CJay.
Let's just pause right there. This is one of the points that like I'm particularly interested in is like, why is it that evangelicals, we'll just say like just general evangelicals, why aren't they aware of what's going on in the political world around them? I think that's the first question that I'm interested in. Like, why didn't they realize that this was this had to do with like you and I have disagreements in this area, but like Stephen Wolf is a two kingdom guy, right?
Yeah.
Why aren't people aware that he's talking about the civil kingdom? Why aren't they aware that he's talking about the political kingdom? They have no awareness of what's happening beyond their strict gospel silo. I think that's the first problem is they don't have a theology of the world around them.
Yeah, so some of it is like the immediate reaction from a lot of people was, why are you dividing the church? right? Because the
Exactly.
word that set everyone off, like if you took white off of this tweet, if it just read evangelicals are the lone bulwark against moral insanity in America, very few people, I mean, there would have been people that had problem with it for sure, but nobody would have had a serious problem, or nobody serious would have had a problem with it. Um, people with neon colored hair maybe wouldn't have liked it, but that's it. But the fact that he used white evangelicals, he used the phrase white evangelicals, people are like, why are you dividing the church between white and black? Why are you doing that? And of course, you go through it, and this is one of the great things about social media is you go back on anybody who made, like, why are you using that phrase white evangelicals? And you go back and you look at their tweets after like the Trump victory in 2016, and they're all like, white evangelicals have a lot of splaining to do for voting for this bad guy Donald Trump. Like they all had tweets like that. Like every single one of them had tweets like that, saying, talking about white evangelicals as a demographic group voting the way they did, because that was a big talking point after the election in 2016 was white evangelicals overwhelmingly supported Trump, who's an adulterer and slept with porn stars and all this stuff. Like, he's a bad guy. Why did you vote for this bad man? And so people, that was a talking point that they used. So it was okay for them to criticize white evangelicals as a group in that moment, right? It was okay to criticize them, but here Stephen Wolf is praising them, right? He's praising them. That's very bad. You are not allowed to do that. You have to, right? You have to only talk about them as bad people, because the regime says that they are bad people. And why are they bad people? Because that is the very most right-wing group, population-wise, in the entire country. And so, like, why is Christian nationalism this horrible, awful, terrible thing that has to be rooted out of our country? It's a threat to democracy, and it's so bad. Why is that? Because white evangelicals are the most right-wing voting group in America by far, by a wide margin. And so that's why Stephen's saying this, right? And he went on and explained it and backed it up with data and things like that. I mean, some of it, like some of the freak out is because a lot of people just are not aware of this data.
That's what I'm
right?
saying.
They have no idea. They just think that maybe evangelicals in general are Republican and vote against baby killing and chopping off the genitals of children. And so they just assume evangelicals are against that stuff politically, but they're not as a group, right? It's broken down, actually. There's a racial divide on this question. And it's very real, and people want to pretend it's not real. Like, they want to believe that the racial divide within evangelicalism doesn't exist because of Galatians 3:28. We just have to bury our heads in the sand about this stuff. So go ahead, CJ. You had more to say.
Oh, that's basically like my initial observation is, like, anytime you bring up like a demographic, it has to be a statement about the church. I mean, like, let's just name him. This was like James White's problem with the tweet, is he said he's dividing it up in the church up. Like, there's no mention of the church. He's obviously talking about the civil kingdom. He's obviously talking about a political phenomenon and political voting demographics within the context of an overall narrative where white evangelicals are seen as the anchors on progress. Like, without them and their voting efforts, we could make it a lot farther in terms of equality and justice and all these things. White evangelicals are the problem. And Stephen Wolf is entering into that conversation and saying, actually, no, these white evangelicals that you all hate are the lone bulwark. As a voting bloc, they are the ones that are preventing, case by case, issue by issue, the moral insanity of America. It has nothing to do with, like, the unity of the church in Christ.
No, this is not a tweet, and
why do we have to explain that? Like, because
no,
people
exactly.
Have no reference point to what's happening politically.
Yeah, and so, like, to begin with, I have a lot of respect for James White.
Sure.
And I have a lot of respect for a lot of the guys that lost their minds over this. They're good people. They're good guys, and I disagree with them. It's okay to disagree with people you respect and like. So I just want to get that out of the way, because I have strong criticism about this, because Stephen is not talking about we shouldn't let black people take communion in our church anymore. Like, that's not what he's saying here. He's not saying, oh, whites are the only good Christians and blacks are bad ones, or that Voti Bakum doesn't exist and all conservative evangelicals that are against abortion don't exist. Like there are many, but as a group, right? This is what you do when you are doing like electoral politics. You break
Right.
things down by group.
Mhm.
Like so. For instance, black people are the most reliable Democratic voting group.
Mhm.
They vote consistently year after year, 90% to 10%, and it fluctuates 1 or 2% either direction. Right?
Mhm.
That's the breakdown every single year for like the last 50 years for since before we were born. It's always been that way. And it's still it's not quite that stark, but it's still a wide margin among black evangelicals, right? A
Mhm.
majority of black evangelicals, people that say that they are evangelical Christians, they're born again Christians, still vote for Democrats.
Mhm.
That's a reality. That is data. That is real. And you could dispute it. You could say, well, maybe they're you could do it in like this Baptist way. Well, they're not real evangelicals because they're not saved because they vote for abortion and gay marriage and all this kind of stuff. It's like, okay, we could have that conversation, sure. But in terms of like they're defining themselves as evangelicals. They're defining themselves in the same using the same criteria that you do for white evangelicals. That are polled this way.
Mhm.
So it's the same criteria for everybody. It's not. It doesn't change. And so that's a big part of it. Is people are just unaware of that data. Like they don't know that it exists, and there is this boomer conservative, right, from the boomer generation. It's not. I'm not just making fun of the older generation. Like it's their generation that believes that only in individualism, that there are no groups, and that it's wrong. It's morally wrong to view people at a group level. To say you're part of this group, I'm part of that group. They think everybody's just an individual, and of course, there's a lot of great things about thinking that way, right? It's good to, under in most circumstances, it's great to think about only individuals on an individual level. But when you're doing politics, right, in a mass democracy, in electoral politics in a nation of 330 million people, you have to use demographics. You have to use demographic breakdowns. And here, right, everyone has believed their entire life that group dynamics don't matter, and that, I mean, part of like the boomer conservative mantra is that identity politics is evil, identity
Mhm.
politics is bad. Um and what has happened in the last 50 years is that Democrats have used identity politics,
Mhm.
and what has happened? They've won with identity politics, and saying we're not going to use that weapon. We're not going to pick up that weapon off the ground because we have principles. We're not going to do identity politics on the right. Um, and what has happened? All we've done is lose consistently. And the biggest identity group that that supports the Republican Party is white evangelicals, and of course they get treated like an abused spouse by the GOP, right? I mean that's the other irony of this is like the most loyal demographic group is white evangelicals to the GOP, and they are not rewarded in almost any way. Like it took Trump uh, nominating 3 Supreme Court justices and getting them on the Supreme Court to overturn the most terrible, just from a legal perspective, besides a moral one, ruling that the Supreme Court has ever done. And it took Trump doing that. It took a guy like from the outside and rewarding them, not like who's not part of the typical GOP system, right? He rewards them, right? He rewards evangelicals this way. It's comical almost. If it wasn't so sad. And so we don't want to we think it's morally wrong to pick up that weapon. Like we think it's like, and this is part of the controversy over the last couple days, is it's morally wrong to view people in groups, right? That's the thing that a lot of evangelical Christians, when they look at Stephen Wolf's tweet, are saying that's morally wrong. You cannot do that. That's a sin to
Mhm.
to group people together and make generalizations about groups.
Well,
And
there was that one response that said that it was may have been true, but it was still racist. Like
yes,
so
yes,
you can't even you can't even mention it because it's like racist, which it's not, and I don't even really know what that means in that context. But
yeah.
that's a really revealing. It's a really revealing thought as well. To make that point.
Absolutely. Like that's the thing. It's like, well, shouldn't we care what the truth is? Right? Like shouldn't we care what the truth is? At a baseline, right? Who cares what the world says a thing is? If it's true, it matters. And if the world says you're not allowed to say this, then you definitely should say it if it's true. How do people not get this? I mean, it just exposes this like fundamental level of cowardice that people have. They're terrified to say things that are true if it offends liberal pieties. Like this is the thing. Like these ideas are deep, buried deep within modern liberalism. Is that everybody is all the same. Everybody thinks exactly like you do. There are no differences on a group level, population wide, right? You can't view groups. You can't think about groups. You just have to think about everybody all the same and treat them all the same. And when you see data that shows that, well, actually people are different. Like different groups of people behave differently and think differently and have different goals and different desires and so forth as a group at a group level. Like that like the level of cognitive dissonance that springs up from people it produces things like that where it's like, well, it might have been true, but it's still bad. It's like, what? What do you mean? What do you mean? So I think, I mean, thinking about this, what were some of the other ones, CJ, that you saw that were the reactions that were hilarious to you? There's a few more that I have.
Yeah, well, I just got into these like little subtweets and sub conversations and sub threads where basically people were just saying that like the mistake is that we are putting our group identity above our identity in Christ, and then you push back and say, well, I'm just we can talk about the fact that we have multiple identities. We live in two different worlds. We have an identity in Christ, but we also have our family, and there you can have both. And they're like, well, you're prioritizing. We're not prioritizing one. I recognize how like primary priorities versus secondary priorities. We recognize how that all works. And it's just amazing how they can't get that through their heads that we're somehow talking about things other than the identity in Christ. Like that's the biggest problem that I have with evangelicalism and where it's gone over the decades and centuries is it's in this weird place where you can't think about the temporal. You are not allowed to think about the earthly civil order. You have to only be heaven oriented. Only. You can't even bring anything else up. So I think that is like a general problem I had with it. But it's not just the white evangelical problem. They also got into like detailed critiques of like the phrase lone bulwark. Like they would say things like, well, the white evangelicals are not alone. There actually is other people that are not white that are part of the bulwark, and they can't recognize what he's saying and what he's arguing, because he didn't say they're alone in their opposition. He said they are alone specifically in their function as a bulwark, as an electoral bulwark. They're alone. That's what he's saying. Like without the white evangelicals, every single one of these issues would have been collapsed a long time ago. Gun control, abortion, gay marriage, all of it would have fallen a long time ago. They are the lone bulwark, not alone in their opposition, not alone as individuals, but as a demographic, they are specifically a bulwark in a way that no one else is.
Yeah, if you flip this around, right? If you flip this around and say, because like the lone bulwark of the Democratic Party is black people in general. Like that's their biggest demographic group. That's why the Republican Party every year, every election cycle spends massive amounts, and it doesn't work, but massive amounts to try to appeal. I mean, Trump spent all this time trying to appeal with like the Platinum Plan to nudge maybe 1 or 2% more black voters into his camp. And he did really well among black voters compared to typical Republican. But all that is to say, like that is their bedrock. Like that's their core base. Like they know they're always going to get that group of people in an election. And so if you take them off the board, it's over, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's so like who's the lone bulwark of the left, right? Well, it's the black voter. And like even like saying that out loud, right? You're not allowed to say that. You can't bring up that point, but it's true. And so like the lone bulwark, like the group in the opposite way on the right, like if you take this group off the board, right, and evangelicals are not consistent Republican voters, that they're going to get the GOP would have given in on abortion decades ago,
Mm-hmm.
right? If they didn't exist, they would be more pro-trans right now than they already are, which they already are too much to an extent as it stands. But that's what the point that Wolf is making. He's not saying that is there are 30% of black evangelicals Republican, right? Which amounts to maybe 1 million people across the entire country, right? A very small percentage of people. Is he not saying that they exist? No, he's not saying that. Like for someone to read that in there, it takes there's a level of dishonesty that you have that you sink to be able to say, well, why is he not including black people, black evangelicals here? Like why is he including Catholics and other things? It's like you don't get it. You don't get it. Like if you someone made this point that, and I think it's a good one, right? If you have an army, right, and you have in the very middle, right, your absolutely most crack troops, like your very best troops, and a bomb gets dropped on them, they're all dead, right, and they're gone, right? You could still have a lot of other troops, but you're going to lose the battle, right? That group was your lone bulwark, right? That was the group that was going to be the decisive group, whether you won or lost the battle. And like what upsets people isn't even the detail, the parsing out of what he said, or anything like that. What upsets these people is that he is summoning forth this idea of white people thinking of themselves as an identity group, right? That's what people are upset about. Right, you're not allowed to think that way because that's bad. Like you said this, like you're saying that your identity as a white person is more important than your identity as Christ. Well, that's not true. Nobody thinks that except like Looney Tunes people, like crazy people. Like nobody thinks that. Nobody's saying that. Mm-hmm. Stephen Wolf is not saying that, right? But you are, and like a lot of this is to like bring it back to the friend enemy distinction, like bring it back to practical politics. Right, because somebody in my mentions was like, well, why do you think black evangelicals vote for Democrats? You racist, it's like that is their is the tone of the question if we're going to tone police, right? Why do you think that, huh? Do you think they're inferior? Do you think they're stupid? Like why do you think that? And it's like, well, the data exists. Like it's a reality. We can posit different theories as to why this is. I think the most persuasive one is that black people have high in-group preference. Mm-hmm. Like they think of themselves, like think back to Hurricane Katrina and Kanye West, where he's like, this was like an eye-opening thing for me as a white kid from the upper Midwest when it happened. George Bush doesn't care about black people, right? And it was like I was like, what's going on there with that? But like that is how the majority of black people think, is of themselves as part of this group called black people. Mm-hmm. Right? They think of themselves as part of this group. They draw.
Most people do. Most people do, except for white evangelicals. Like that's this is part of what's happening in the world. People don't recognize it. Like, and I had a tweet thread on this a couple of weeks ago where basically I just said, look, nobody really. Like none of like the base Protestant people in America really thought of themselves as like being a white group for the first 200 years of our nation. People didn't think like that. People didn't think of those terms. What happened is people did think of themselves as Americans. They did think of themselves as Americans, and Americans came from like mostly British stock, but it also came from German stock, and there was French in there and other Western European countries. But nobody thought of themselves as white. It wasn't until the black identity came to become a political momentum, a political force in America, that people had to really ask themselves that if the enemy is drawing lines in this way, who's going to defend us as a group? And at the same time that was happening, there was all of this propaganda about how you're not ever allowed to think of yourselves in group. You have to think of yourselves only as individuals. And so what they did was they took the base demographic of America and they divided them up as individuals. And then they took the non-base demographic of America, which included the third world, and they took those people and said that you're a collective and you need to fight for your rights as a belonging to the collective. And so now what's happening is there's this political dynamic where there's these specific groups fighting for their identity rights against people who don't belong anywhere except for only to themselves. And who's going to win that battle?
Yeah.
And so there's that's the American dilemma, is white people have been trained to think of themselves as individuals, and black people have been radicalized and revolutionized, generally speaking, to think of themselves as a group. And that is where we are right now. And it's a dilemma. I don't like, we talked about this before we came on. I didn't come into the situation wanting to fight for my right as a white person. It's just that that's where the political lines are, and who's going to stand up for us.
Yeah, I mean, some of it, you see this too. I mean, talking about like news of the week, you see like the big news going on right now is in like Kansas City, somewhere in Missouri. A black kid got shot by an 85-year-old homeowner. And the narrative initially was, well, he just rang the doorbell and the guy blew him away. And now it's like, well, did he? Then it becomes unclear. Did he walk in the home, or what exactly happened? And was there, understand your ground law? Was there justification for shooting? But that's the big news right now. Is this guy, this horrible? And it's like CNN drags the guy's grandson, who looks like he's part black, maybe he's got dreadlocks, and I don't know. But like the grandson goes on CNN, and Don Lemon is grilling him, doing a struggle session live on national TV, and said, "Is your grandpa racist?" He's like, "Yeah, I'd say that he's a traditional white Christian man, and he's influenced by by racial bias or whatever, some like woke language answer."
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that's the big controversy happening right now. Is like it's very clear, and like that happens, and it's a tragic thing. Like you don't want kids getting shot. Like that's horrible. And why did it happen? Well, this 85-year-old guy is terrified that he's going to get robbed, because old people get robbed and victimized by crime, and our society has decided that we're going to go really soft on crime, and so it makes old people like that even more scared. And so like it's this horrible tragedy that maybe could have been prevented if we didn't tolerate crime like it is. But so that happens, number one. And then in the same week, two like high school age girls, white girls, get shot in similar incidents, right? Where one, her boyfriend was backing up in someone's driveway and she gets shot. And so that's not huge news. Like it's been in the news, we're aware of it, but it's not a national controversy. It's not some racial imbroglio. It is because it's white people getting shot. Like that doesn't move the needle. That doesn't matter. And like this guy is gonna face this 85-year-old guy is going to face very stiff justice, because like part of the goal in all this stuff in this like anti-white paradigm is they know that they're not going to be able to like outlaw the Second Amendment. Like they can do it kind of piecemeal in some states, but they know like the NRA and gun groups are very powerful, have a very strong lobby, and they're not going to be able to do it in Washington. So what they will do is they will make the Second Amendment null and void, because they'll just selectively prosecute people. So they'll like take all of the prosecutorial resources away from stopping murderers and rapists and burglars and things like that, and they're going to devote them to 85-year-old guys that shoot someone that that open the door to their house. And so like they want to make it so that stand your ground law is really null and void that way. And so like that's where we're at. And so like you have these like evangelical leaders. All this is to go back to this. Evangelical leaders are like, this is horrible racial injustice. A white guy shot a black kid, and it's terrible. But at the same time, like you look at like crime statistics, and like it's so backwards, right? Compared like the attention that this crime is given compared to like how much white people are victimized by crime. And nonetheless, like they don't care, because the entire regime, the entire media, every institution is fully in the bag for hating white people, viewing white people as the enemy, as the bad guy. And And it's like I don't want to think, like you said, I don't want to think about this stuff, right? I don't want to think about things in those terms, right? We both were trained to be good little democratic liberal boys here to think the right thoughts, to always think right think, and to never think about things in racial terms. That's very bad. And like we're at a point where like you can't do that. Like you can't just look at at what is happening. You can't look at reality and continue to bury your head in the sand and understand that look, you have enemies. You have a woke left that is running the country, and they know that this group, white evangelicals, right? People, white people with this traditional morality, they're the enemy. They're the enemy. We have to destroy them. They have that mindset. They know this. And we, white evangelicals, are like, well, we can't think of ourselves as a group. That's really bad. That would be worse than being sent off to the gulag by these people. That's like the attitude that people have. Yeah. It's like, well, that's worse if we sacrifice our principles, even though like there's nothing in the Bible that says you can't do identity politics. Right? Mm-hmm. There's nowhere in the Bible that says thou shalt not do identity politics in a democracy. Like there is the Bible is condemning identity politics in the church. Absolutely, 100%. You may not do that in the church, right? But not in the state.
Right. Exactly. Not in the civil order. You're allowed to recognize where the enemies are, the lines that they're drawing, and you're allowed to coalesce around that enemy distinction, find your friends and defend yourself and your people and your children, so it's but like I keep coming back to this fact that so many of the responses were just criticizing him for dividing the church, and I just can't get I just can't get over that transfer. I had a thread right after that where I was just reflecting on this phenomenon of these like I call them boomer conservatives, boomer cons, whatever, but there's just like this ingrained habit where they take something that's a statement, some sort of statement that's meant to refer to the civil realm, and the first thing they do to critique it is they drag it over into the church realm, and then they castigate and reprimand the person making the statement for dividing the church and saying that this has no place in the church. You're the one that brought it into the church, not Stephen. Yeah. Stephen did not make that reference. You did. And it's like the biggest cheap shot. It's the biggest straw man, and it's a systematic straw man. And it happens everywhere we go. We see it all over the place. It's like the same thing as like, you can't convert people at the point of a gun. Like that's the problem with Christian nationalism. It's like we're not trying to convert them at all. We're trying to create laws that let the church thrive and push away enemies to the thriving church. We're not trying to convert somebody at the point of a gun, but like they draw into the church context and then they critique it. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's so much of it is along those lines. Like I saw this, someone quoted James White from his podcast saying just that really the issue is that he talks about like Galatians 3:28, and I've talked about this before, but like that is the verse, and as Stephen actually tweeted about it too, but that is the verse that is used to shoehorn in every single modern liberal horrible thing, right? There's no male nor female, so obviously transgenderism is fine, right? There's no Jew nor Greek, so you can't make distinctions between this group and that group. That and people do that and say, well, that globalism is great. We should just all be part of one big global state, and have no distinctions between nations and peoples. All these things. It's like that's not what the verse is about. It's not about that at all. It's about divisions within the church.
Yeah, it
right?
says
People
that.
being
says
divided.
that right there. It says in Christ.
That's what the whole book of Galatians is about. Is inside the church there are divisions between Jews and Greeks. Right, there can't be divisions like that, but whether it's race, whether it's gender, any of those things within the church, right? That can't exist. But that's not what we're talking about, right? Joe Biden, right, when like his administration has decided that people, and I tweeted about this, and people freaked out about it too, because they don't want to believe hard data on anything, but the Biden administration said we're going to make these rules so that banks have to lend money, I mean, very 2008 style, lend money to people with bad credit, and we'll just subsidize it with people with good credit, right? We'll make them pay more. Well, it's like, well, this is friend enemy distinction stuff. It's like, who are the voters for the Biden administration? Who are the people that are their patrons that they're trying to give stuff to? It's non-white people, right? And people are like, what do you mean? You say everybody that's not white has bad credit? It's like, well, if you look at the breakdown of credit scores, that's just the reality, right? I'm not trying to say these are bad people or good people or anything like that. It's like, this is just the objective reality. You have to deal with reality as it exists, right? And so this is the reality, and they see that. It's like, we're going to benefit our friends. We're going to give them stuff, and our enemy, right, white people, we're going to punish them. And it's like, right, Joe Biden is not dividing the church here. He's not caring about the church one way or the other. I mean, he is in a way, but this is not regarding the church in any way. This is, you are a second-class citizen in your own country, and we're gonna punish you, right? That's what all of wokeness is, right? That's what all of affirmative action is that you white people, you're bad. You are bad because you're white, and we are going to punish you, and we're gonna reward these other people, right? That's how modern identity politics works, and you don't win in that situation by saying, well, we're just not going to play. We're just not going to do that. Right? We're just not gonna. We're gonna stand by our principles, right? Well, that's not gonna work. You're gonna lose then. It's over if that's the way you think. Like, cool if you want to go to the gulag with your principles, great, but it's a stupid principle anyway, right? That's the point. It's a really dumb principle, because like CJay said, right? If you're lining up for battle, and this group over here is going to operate in like a phalanx, in a coordinated action, and they're going to operate as a group, right? And this group over here, they're going to be a group as well, and they're going to fight together as a group. And then the other army might be way bigger, but they're all individuals. You fight by yourself, right? It's you against the world, right? Well, who's going to win in that battle, right? Everybody knows what's the outcome of that is going to be. It's so absurd. It's so ridiculous, and it's like. And so part of it is like, some of it is people don't, constantly Christian nationalism and evangelicalism as a whole gets slandered as being white nationalist and racist and evil and bad. And so like people are afraid of that, right? They're terrified of being called racists, right? They're terrified of being called Wignats. Like, I'm not one, right? I'm perfectly happy living in a country with all sorts of different people. Like, I'm okay with that. All things being equal, sure. Like, you don't have to have this a mono-ethnic society. Like, it's possible, and throughout history, that societies with different ethnic groups in them have been able to thrive. Right, that works. But what you can't have is these groups over here saying you can fight as a group against the majority group, and run them over completely. Like, you can't. That will destroy a society, and that's what's that's what's happening. And as people are terrified to admit the truth, like they're terrified of like identity politics is really bad. Like they're terrified of that, and so like what's the solution? To just pretend it's not happening. That's what people. That's their solution to it. It's like, well, we'll just pretend it's not happening, because that's just bad. Like I don't have any time for that. I don't have any time for that. It's like, I don't care. Like, part of it is like, part of 2016 is that Trump, whether he did it intentionally or not, right, appealed to the white working class in America. Like, that's why he won, because the issues that white working class America cared about, immigration, losing jobs overseas, crime and drugs coming from Mexico, things like that. That's what he campaigned on. And wouldn't you know it, they came out for him in droves. It was, whether he meant it or not, it was an identity politics issue, right? They cared about that issue, that group, and he's rewarding his friends, right, by supporting that. His enemies, right, are the regime, and they like that. They like destroying Middle America, right? Because
Hmm.
they don't want Middle America to have power. They want all the power to be in New York City and in Los Angeles and Chicago. They want power in these urban centers. That's where they want
Hmm.
power to be, in the wealth and everything else. They don't want Middle America to have any wealth. And so like that's what all of this revolves around, is like 2016, whether Trump meant it or not, he did identity politics and won. And
Hmm.
so we can't have that. No, we can't. We can't allow any identity politics around here. And so some of it too is like, you have these people when they make this argument, like, well, what about these black evangelicals? Are you saying they're bad people then? Like, you say Vodi Bakum is bad because he's not a white evangelical? Like, it's such ridiculous stuff. But it's like, well, no, there aren't very many guys like him.
Hmm.
Like that's the reality. Because even if they're like doctrinally solid, black folks, like they'll vote for Democrats because that's what black folks do. Is you vote for the Democrat. Like,
Hmm.
that's I've known them, actually, like guys
Hmm.
who are like veterans and conservative and everything else. But it's like, well, who'd you vote for? Well, I voted for Bill Clinton. And it's like, well, really? Well, yeah, like, or I voted for Al Gore or John Kerry. Like, they'll vote for Democrat because they think about things in terms of the group, that this
Hmm.
benefits my people.
Hmm.
They don't think any other way, and you're not going to train that out of people. You're not going to preach the gospel, and then suddenly all of these people think I should think as an individual now and not as part of a group. Like, that's not the way it
God made
works.
us. It's not the way God made us
Yeah,
either. Yeah, He made us
yeah.
for family, and He made us for like natural relations. I mean, one of the things that Stephen's book does is it goes through like a lot of the historical, church, various church fathers and medieval thinkers and post Reformation thinkers, all of whom talked in terms of the fact that God gave us families. He gave us extensions of the families. He gave us kin groups. He gave us nations, and we're supposed to work together on behalf of those who we share a way of life and a common history with, and that's part of the glory of God's created order. So I do think we have an obligation to think in terms of continuity, right? Think in terms of
Yeah.
our ancestors, and think in terms of us facilitating the past to the present to the future, and that's our function, is to honor our ancestors and pass on the things that we've been given onto our posterity. I think that's a very biblical concept, and the idea that we're only supposed to think of ourselves solely in terms of like these like transcendent, these like supra material
Mm.
things, I think is completely, it's Gnosticism. That's what
Yeah.
it is. It is
Yeah.
a religious Gnosticism, and that's what's going on here.
Yeah. It doesn't. Like, these things are not supposed to matter, and that's like liberalism in its fundamental commitments is fundamentally Gnostic. And a lot of people use that word flippantly, the G word, the GN word, flippantly. But it's true. Like, you're
Hmm.
you're not supposed to think about these things in this way. But it,
In fact,
that's reality.
I'm a Paul Gottfried guy. He says that a lot of modern politics is Gnostic. You're not allowed to think in terms of material identification. Well, you're not allowed to
Yeah.
think in terms of like ethnic relations, tribal relations, kinship relations, and then nationalities. You're not supposed to think of these at all. You have to only think of yourself as belonging to the quote, capital U universal man. That's the
Yeah.
only way that you can conceive of yourself. And he blames that on the development of Gnosticism over time, over the centuries.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, like I think that that's a fair point, and I think that people need a lot of introspection. It's time to start thinking of yourself as belonging somewhere with a home, with roots, with And I have a friend who's English, and they just moved out of London. They used to live in London, and he's like, I'm like, there's like 20% British people in London. Like
Yeah.
everyone else is like, I am a minority everywhere I go. This was the land that was earned for me by my ancestors, and I
Yeah.
am no longer welcome there. We have a prime
Yeah.
minister, we have a political leadership, and none of them, or I mean, few of them over the years, increasingly fewer, are English. How can
Yeah.
you expect someone from a foreign land to think in terms of their duties to prolong and promulgate English historical norms? You can't expect that from them. And he's been pushed out, and he moved. And he's like, the land that was given to me, that I inherited from my ancestors, I am no longer welcome in. That makes me sad, because I think there
Yeah.
is part of the created order that is supposed to receive these things, these familial passing ons with gratitude, and pass them on to our the people that come after us. And I think it's really sad that this is happening in the West, and it's happening willfully, and
Yeah.
people are happy about it. And I
Yeah.
think it's just a great tragedy. You can't turn the clock back on that.
No, no, you can't. And I mean, so much of it. I mean, this gets into to questions of immigration. It gets into questions um, of politics more generally. Is that I mean, America as this place, um, it it is part of this Anglo-Saxon political tradition, right?
Hmm.
You're part of an actual people. Like I've mentioned this before. Like I mean, my majority of my heritage is German, but my ancestors quickly assimilated to this Anglo-Saxon American culture,
Hmm.
and all of ours, largely did. Like became part of it. Like it was very easy to graft people in, and all of that is largely gone
Hmm.
now. I mean, you have and you have like you have people that come here that assimilate for sure. But the assimilation that's happening in America is to this globalist woke religion, this globalist woke culture more than
Hmm.
it is anything else. Like you see it in the Twin Cities. The Somalis, like Ilhan Omar, right? Many of them don't hold to like traditional Muslim beliefs or anything like that. They become really woke, right? They
Hmm.
become like woke left wing people quickly, and they get rid of most of things other than the superficial cultural trappings of where they
Yeah.
come from. But they fully like quickly become this like empty vessel that just absorbs all of the wokeness. Um,
There's a quote in the book, The Camp of the Saints, which I recommend to people. It's just one of the greatest works of fiction in the modern era. But he talks about the fact that, like, as the third world just floods into France, he has this saying that's like, they're gonna take an old oak door that has like a community meeting. They're gonna take this like very significant old oak door, and they're gonna be cold, so they're gonna use it as firewood, because they just don't
yeah,
have
they
this,
don't
like,
value it.
yeah, why would they? And it makes sense.
Yeah,
I don't expect them to,
yeah.
but like, there are consequences for not thinking in terms of your own past.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so much of it is so discouraging, in some ways, because a lot of these, like the people that should get it, or that should understand these things and have the courage to ask questions that people don't want to ask,
Hmm.
um, don't do it. Are terrified to do it, and not only are terrified to do it, but they view their fear of asking questions and pursuing lines of inquiry as a great virtue, right?
Hmm.
They view and so because they view it as a great virtue, they'll attack someone like Steven,
Hmm.
and or they'll attack me when I use like credit score data, and say like, here, there's differences here. I mean, you can assign whatever theory you like, but the differences exist. There's a like they're there. So you figure it out, but they're there, and so like they attack over this stuff, and they get really mad because they think you're a bad person for
Hmm.
pointing out facts and because these are hate facts, these are bad things, and,
Hmm.
like that's the discouraging thing. It's like it's so much of this stuff needs to be said and talked about and figured out because I think it's certainly possible, absolutely possible, that you can have racial harmony and peace in America. I don't doubt that for a second, actually. Like people think that, like, because people will attack you like you're a racist and you're a white nationalist and you're all this stuff. It's like, no, I'm not any of those things. I think that there can be racial harmony in America between whites and blacks and other peoples. Um, but what it will take is complete destruction of the left. The left has to be completely and utterly destroyed. Wokeness has to be rooted out fundamentally, and order has to be restored.
Hmm.
Right? That's the only way. That's the only way. And if you do those things, life for every group, all the different identity groups, will be better.
Hmm.
Right? That's one of the main things. Like I'll tell people, it's like, if you want if you want to make life better for black people, then wokeness needs to be destroyed.
Hmm.
Right? Like if you want to make life better for Hispanics and all these other people, like then it needs to go away. Like we need to win.
Yeah,
Otherwise, like it's like life is way worse.
yeah, yeah. And what you're talking about is winning. You can't appeal to some like hypothetical ideological theory like classical liberalism. You have
No.
to win. That's what you're saying is
Yeah.
you have to win. You have to have political relevance and you have to have political strategy. Part of political strategy is being aware of demographic voting blocks and
Yeah.
utilizing them and employing them. And in order to utilize them and employ them, you have to be honest about them. You
Yeah.
know. So yeah, I agree.
Well, and fundamentally, like people just do not want to be honest. That's a lot of it. Is they would rather lie about things than tell the truth. Like they would rather Stephen lied and said
Hmm.
that evangelicalism in general is the lone bulwark when that's not true and the data shows that. That is not a true statement. It
Hmm.
isn't. It's more specific white evangelicalism. It is, you could be upset about that, but that's what the data shows. Like you if maybe you think the data's fake or maybe whatever, you could have that argument. But like sometimes you just have to come to grips with the way things actually are.
Hmm.
Right. And people are so scared of doing that. And I understand why they're scared because like your life will be destroyed if you do that. Like
Yeah.
you're not free to do that. That's why I say like it needs to be pastors who have the courage to be able to say, well, actually there are racial, problems in America. It's not true. It's not just woke people causing problems. Like there are racial differences. There are racial animosities. There's all sorts of racial issues in our country, and we should be honest about those things. Right? We
Hmm.
shouldn't lie about them because it's safer to do that. And pastors in particular and Christian leaders in particular should be the ones that should be the safest to be able to pursue the truth.
Hmm.
That's what's kind of discouraging about this. But the encouraging thing is in all of this discussion is that there are a lot of people who are thinking through this stuff for the very first time,
Hmm.
right? Who had no idea any of these statistics existed. They had no idea that the crime statistics are the way that they are. They have no idea um, that like the credit score stuff, any of this stuff. They had no idea that there are actual like tangible differences, um, and and so like it breaks a lot of people's brains on one hand. On the other hand, it causes people to like actually think through solutions. Like how do we make life better for everybody in our country, right?
Hmm.
Like that's the question. Like I can't speak for you, but I can assume like I want life to be good for all the different groups in our country. Right. I want people to have good lives. I want people to have families and children and jobs and to be able to lead productive lives. I want that for everybody.
Hmm.
Right? Not just the people in my demographic group. I want it for the whole country. And so like but to do that, like you're going to have to summon a lot of courage to be honest.
Hmm.
Um, that's what it will take.
Hmm.
And right now we don't have it. And I don't. And again, like somebody brought this up. Like you think all these guys are cowards? Um, no, I don't. I don't think they consciously are being cowardly. I think they are fully bought into a system that is not true, and just because you don't have the because some of like you take it back to like Jonathan Edwards, for example, was he cowardly for not becoming an abolitionist and owning slaves? No, I don't think he was actually. But in his situation, in the world that he was in, um, it would have required a tremendous amount of courage to step out of the mainstream to do that. Right,
Hmm.
for example, right? Some people are simply just not ready to
Well,
pursue certain things.
yeah, I also think that they don't they're not aware. They're not aware of anything beyond what they've been taught either. Like they don't
Yeah,
like I think we're past the point where people recognize that it's even a thing to defend your nation, defend your
hmm
people. I think that they're they've so absorbed the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age,
yeah,
that they don't know any other way of dealing with these types of statements. You know,
no,
they don't recognize that you can take this statement, divide between a political civil order comment, and make that as a distinction between that order and the kingdom of Christ. I don't think
Yeah.
people are. I don't think they can make that. So, like, one of the things that Stephen pointed out is that he doesn't think like 'cause if you look at all the old tweets. I don't want to just use people's names, but he just comes to mind. But like Samuel Say, right?
Hmm.
There's like he was very critical of white evangelicals after they voted for Trump, right?
Hmm.
But I don't think they're being hypocritical. I don't think they realize the
No,
disconnect there. I don't. I
no.
don't think he's. I don't think he's a hypocrite. I really don't. I think that he's just absorbed the spirit of the age.
Yeah, yeah. I think.
And
I mean, and the spirit of the age is that you could criticize white people,
mm-hmm.
but you cannot praise them as a
Yeah,
group. You can
you
criticize them
can.
as a group, but you may never praise them. And so that's set. Like they've absorbed this, and that is what set them off. Is this is
Mm-hmm.
racist and bad? It's evil and racist to praise white people. Like that's the standard, right? And people will come around and they'll backfill, retcon some Bible verses around that, including Galatians 3:28 always. Um,
Yeah.
and but that's not the way Christians have thought for millennia, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is like that it's evil to think of nationalities and groups and things like that. It's like I mean you look at like King Alfred fighting the Danes, and it's like, well, uh Alfred, you can't fight those. You can't think of them as a group. They're just a collection of individuals, right? Well, no, you can, you certainly can, and what actually, interestingly, the result is a whole bunch of Danes got baptized and became Christians. um,
Mm-hmm.
and so, like, all of this is to say, like, I think, yeah, people have, you're right, have just never thought about these things, have never questioned it, have never thought that maybe liberalism and just this liberal egalitarian view, an individualistic view, might be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
That this liberal moralism and these pieties, like that's the thing. Like people want it, like they want you to condemn Stephen for what he tweeted, because it violates the pieties of the zeitgeist, and they're not biblical pieties.
Mm-hmm.
They're the zeitgeist pieties, and it's that they're powerful, right? They animate a lot of emotions in people when you upset them, and it
Mm-hmm.
it takes, like, you want. I mean, everybody wants to like talk about smashing idols and chopping down Donner's oak, um, but they don't want to like do that actually
Mm-hmm.
because it upsets people, right?
Mm-hmm.
People are not happy when you tear down their idols, right? That's what happened to Gideon. Like they were ready to kill him over it, right? People get lynched over attacking their idols, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what happens. And what happened to Stephen? Like people are going after him hard because a thing that they believed to be true, right? This modern liberalist piety, that that group dynamics are not real, and they're you can't view people as groups. He attacked that. He attacked
Mm-hmm.
that idol that they have, and I don't use the word idol flippantly, because that's the thing is that everyone always is accusing everyone else of idolatry all the time.
Yeah.
Like that, it's so stupid. This is like an actual big one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like this mental construct that people have. This is a huge one in our society that, and it's one that's causing us to constantly lose.
Mm-hmm.
Not just like lose elections, but like lose our entire culture, lose our entire way of life. Like there's the reason why all of the trans stuff and everything else is sweeping in like a flood,
Mm-hmm.
and it's because we don't fight it and stand against it effectively.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, but I think that again on the flip side, CJ has the Spengler quote, optimism is cowardice. I disagree. I want to be optimistic. I want to see that people are telling the truth about things and saying that there are real serious racial problems in our country, and that the only way to solve them is winning. Like I think people
Mm-hmm.
are beginning to see this, right? People are beginning to admit that that we have to be honest about
Yeah.
stuff, and honest about trying to figure out solutions. Like that's part of it. It's like the BoomerCon spirit is, we'll just keep losing because we'll eventually die and go to heaven, right? They don't care. Like they don't care
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah. 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 No. That is that's not. I mean, that's the evangelicalism. That's where it's come
Yeah,
to. I have
yeah.
this post. up from evangelicalism that I'm still putting together. But that's one of the reasons I'm just so aggravated with the entire evangelical, like as a phenomenon, as a movement. Like it's like it's just so frustrating to see where they've come from and the things that they've stuck to and cling to, and they've torn out all the other aspects of Christendom, and it's amazing to see. This is the thing that they claim to is the temporal doesn't matter, your family doesn't matter, your culture doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is whether the individual is going to heaven or not. Like it's so
Yeah.
that's not how that's not how Christians thought for over 1,000 years. They didn't think
Yeah.
in terms of like the only thing that matters is like heaven. Like that's a very like almost postmodern mentality, you know?
Yeah, you got to use the G word again, the GN word.
It's very Gnostic, absolutely.
It
Yes.
is. Yeah, it's totally Gnostic a way of thinking, and we have to get rid of that if we want to have any hope of winning. And that's the thing. Like, I mean, part of this
And not
too,
even hope of winning, but just in hope of like of like fulfilling our duties as human beings. This
Yeah.
is the created order. This is what we
Yeah.
were created for. We were
this is our
created.
telos. Yeah,
Yes, we were created to represent the divine order on earth. This
Yeah.
is we're sanctifying the development of history. God has a purpose for history. It's
Yeah.
good when people and cultures and societies grow physically. You know,
Yeah.
like those are good things. They reflect the divine order.
Yeah, and one last thing, I don't want to cut you off there. One last thing, I think before we wrap
Before
this up.
my kids are gonna burst in here in a
Yeah,
minute.
burst
so-
in here, go right through the wall like the Kool-Aid man. Like, but I think one of Wolf's things. This is a point I've made many times in many other places, is that the lone bulwark, right, the white evangelical Untermenschen.
Bulwark.
You know,
By the way, lonebulwark.com. lonebulwark.com. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, lonebulwark.com is CJ's new website that he got. I'm not joking. He really did buy it.
Yeah.
It is like they understand. Our enemies understand if this particular group is activated and begins operating more so as a group. I don't think there's ever going to be like this, very conscious understanding as like white people or anything. Like I'm not calling for that necessarily, but I'm saying like people will talk about like Heritage America, right? And that's more or less. And I like that term better, actually. I mean, it isn't like racially charged, because there are like the Vodi Bakum type black evangelicals that are very conservative, right? Fit right in with that within Heritage America, right?
Mhm.
They're not the majority of black evangelicals, but they do exist, and so I like that term way better.
I actually think there is a descendants of like people who lived in the South, like descendants of slaves. I think they're part of the American mosaic.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm very like British and Anglo-Saxon oriented in our institutions, but like if you watch Gone with the Wind and the way that like the dynamics between like the blacks and whites, that's actually some of that's real. Like
Yeah. Oh yeah. If you go to the South, you see it still.
yeah, it's like
Yeah.
it's real, and so like they're part of that. They're part of that situation. They are heritage Americans in that way. We're very British. Our institutions are very Anglo-Saxon.
Mhm.
Our customs, our demeanors, our instincts, our sentiments, our artwork, our music, all those things came out of Anglo-Saxon America. But you can't deny the fact that there is like a cultural role and function that the blacks have played in our history. Certain blacks, not like Caribbean blacks, but people descendants of slaves. You know, like slavery is bad, but the descendants of the slaves are part of our history,
Yeah.
and they belong here for sure. You know,
Yeah. It's like, yeah, okay. If we had a time machine and we could say we wish this didn't happen, all of us would be like, yeah, I wish we didn't that hadn't have happened. There wouldn't have been slavery. Yes, but they are here. They've been part of our country for hundreds of years. And so there absolutely is a place for, like, that's the other thing, is like people are always like, oh, you think like a group and then you must be racist and hate these people. It's like, no, they're Americans. Like, there are men, for like my dad was in the army and his best friends were black, right? They were black men and they loved their country. They volunteered. They weren't drafted. They volunteered to join the army during Vietnam. These men that my dad served with. And so And are they, you know, are they part of this minority or what? I don't, it doesn't really matter, right? They love these men love their country and understood they were part of this country. They had a heritage here, just like everyone else. So all of this isn't to say to make like, you know, Wignet arguments or anything like that. It's that you have a cultural heritage of particular people in this country. And so that's why I like that term Heritage Americans more, because I think that group is part of that, you know, that term. It isn't strictly divided by race, because people like the second, and Wolf talks about race brain, right? The second you bring up race, people's brains shut off. You know, they just do. Like the second you bring up race, you bring up statistics and demographic data and anything like that, brains shut off completely. Like you can't have a you can't have facts and logic, Ben Shapiro style anymore, right? As soon as race brain comes out. And so like this, I think that term avoids it, right? So if he said Heritage American Evangelicals, then they would have accused him of just doing a racist dog whistle, and you're only referring to white people anyway. But it's like, no, I don't think you are, actually. I think, you know, a guy like Vody or Daryl Harrison, Samuel Say's Canadian, but like those guys I think are part of that group. But go ahead.
Well, yeah, but even if you say like there is Heritage Americans and there is an aspect of Black Americans that came from the South that are part of our history, it still remains the fact of the matter that white evangelicals are still the lone bulwark.
Yeah,
like a lot of the descendants, like especially because in the post-60s world, everyone's become radicalized.
Yes,
like all those Black descendants, they've been pushed to the left by radicals.
Yeah,
you know, so they actually no longer think of themselves as part of a patrimonial history. Like if you would have looked at Blacks in like the 1910s, the 1900s, like 1890s, like things were different then, and in some ways they were more hostile, but in other ways, like especially if you look at the South, there was a healthy like dynamics going on there. Nothing's perfect, nothing's ever perfect on earth. But I think that they've been really radicalized and very made viciously anti-white by the 60s, by the Cultural Revolution. So I don't think things are getting better in terms of racial harmony. I think the civil rights movement has really heated things up. So
it's reached its apotheosis at this point, where they are they've reached, I mean, maybe I don't want to say maximal radicalism, but it's a radical movement that hates white people.
Yeah.
They hate white, like that's, and like even that people are terrified of saying, like, oh, you're just doing race baiting, you're just doing, it's like, no, like this is look at what happened in 2020. Look at the rhetoric of the BLM riots. It was really bad. And so my point here is that you activate this Heritage American group, right? Is majority of which are white evangelicals. And then you throw in like conservative Roman Catholics, and you throw in Black evangelicals that vote Republican, right? You lump this group together and you activate that group, because that's the core base of the Republican Party. Like you activate that group and they begin acting as a group and expecting patronage, right, from the GOP, and being expected to be rewarded, right, by the GOP. Then things really begin to change, right? Then your congressman starts serving the identity group that he represents. It doesn't serve the donors, because right now, the GOP. I mean, you see this with DeSantis. He's bringing back goodies for his voting base, right? That's identity politics, right? They don't want to call it that, but it's identity politics. Like the lone bulwark in Florida is driving that. You don't want to say that, but that's the reality. And so you lean more into identity politics in this way, and you're going to get more rewards for it, politically speaking, right? You're going to get more exercises of power for your group, because you're now acting as a group. You're now saying, we evangelicals are only going to vote for you if you push this. I mean, that's been the implicit arrangement regarding abortion for this whole time. But making it more explicit is good. Actually, right? Making it more explicit is good politically and will drive things. And that's what the left fears, actually. Like they're afraid of identity politics being adopted. Like that's why, right? That's why they're terrified of tweets like this, of people raising this issue, because, right, this is the way politics is in 2023. It'd be nice if it wasn't that way. It would be nice if the Democrats decided we're just going to treat everybody as individuals too. We're going to play by these rules. But that's not the reality, and we have to operate within the way things actually are. So any final words, CJ? Any more on this? We could talk about it for another 3 hours because it's a fascinating topic, and it's honestly, I think, like the future of our politics.
It is. Yeah.
Quite honestly. So anything else?
Not really. I think it's just a good reminder to. It also helps connect you with your own heritage when you begin to think of yourself as part of something greater than yourself. And I think there's a lot of meaning in that. Like I grew up in the '90s, and I didn't really know the long history of where I came from. And I belong to something older than myself, and I think having kids helps with this too. You begin to think of your duty in facilitating the past into the future. Edmund Burke and the classic conservatives just talk about this fact that you are not an individual born without any social context. You have inherited something valuable, and it's your role to pass it on. And in order to pass it on, you do have to think of yourself as being part of something beyond yourself.
Yeah, I think along those lines, I remember reading something by a theologian commenting on the laws of Israel and how both the bastard and the eunuch did not have full civil rights. They didn't, and the reason why is because the bastard has no official heritage that he inherits, he has no father, and the eunuch doesn't have any posterity, and that's the reason why you're cut off from those things. You're cut off from the past. You're cut off from the future. And so those things really do actually matter. And some of it you see, this is why like studying and understanding the Old Testament is so important, is because it really strips away that Gnostic tendency of your New Testament only Christians, because Israel had a past and they had a future, and they understood that. And we need to understand the same thing as well, that you have a past and you have a future, and you shouldn't be afraid of those things. The past was not perfect, and the future is not going to be perfect either. But you need to be faithful in pursuing it. So, any other things that you've worked on this week that you want to point our listeners to? If they've made it all the way to the end, great. We've had a lot of fun today, and so please visit CJ's stuff here.
Yeah, lonebulwark.com is my new site. That's the joke site, but I actually have an article on asking what is culture, and I mentioned a little bit like the ethnic aspects of what culture is. I'm really excited to publish it. I have it almost done, but unfortunately we had to not unfortunately, but I had to record before I could finish it. So that'll be up probably by the time this episode goes live. So go to cjingle.substack.com, and then you can find me on Twitter at Contra Mundum.
Yes, and for me, I have more articles coming this way on news.gab.com. I have a few sermons with exegesis that is really important. We're going through 1 Samuel and learning Christian nationalism from 2,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago. And so there's a lot there, really, really interesting stuff. And I keep promising this World War II article. I'm going to get it into you. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be worth the wait. Hopefully I have that in this week and published. As well, continue to see what we have to say on Gab at Boniface Option and at Contra Mundum Podcast. We're going to keep posting there. CJ's at Gab as well at Contra Mordor. And so and I'd like to apologize to the poster. We're going to make it. We are out of time. We were going to have him on today, but unfortunately not enough time for our friend. But for all of us here, including We're Gonna Make It and CJay Engel, I'm Andrew Isker, and thank you for listening to Contra Mundum. We'll see you next time.